Welcome to the SOB radio show, where we have fun, interesting guests, and hot topics. Each week, we offer insights into music, fashion, health, fitness, and humor. Do you have the perfect guest for us to interview? I want to know. Drop me a line on our Facebook page at Spunky Old Broad 1 or reach out to me on our website at spunkyoldbroad.com. And now, back to the show. Hi, everybody. This is Gayle Carson, and I'm back with my guest, Ilana Landsberg Lewis, who is Executive Director and co-founder of the Stephen Lewis Foundation and the host of Grandmothers on the Move podcast. I want to take a little different turn now, Ilana, and I want to ask what advice you would give, or do you give, to older women who are just retiring. And I would think that they're retiring at all different ages, some at the 55, some at the 65, some at the 75 level. So what advice do you give them?
Well, I think that I can tell you what I've seen, Gail, from the grandmothers that I've worked with, which is that there are different moments in life where you're presented with opportunities, and they're very different kinds of opportunities. And I think retirement is a very rich one. And I've talked to a lot of grandmothers and grandmothers who have said that when they first retired, it was exciting and liberating and a bit of a relief, but also that there was some alienation, not for everyone, but for some, just the pulling back from that chapter of your life and then figuring out where do you have all of the interaction and the stimulation that you had before. And everyone I know has done something different. I think the one thing I would say is that continuing to build community and to find like-minded people around you and get involved in things which you may not have had all the time you wanted before to do is extraordinarily important, because I see it with the grandmothers that I've had the privilege to work with, that it's an extraordinary energizer. And, they love being with their grandchildren, they love being with great-grandchildren and family, but there's another dimension to life once you take work out of it. And for some, it's terrific. All of the grandmothers that I know who can travel do travel and get enormous amount out of it. But nothing really replaces the energy and the purpose that they find coming together with like-minded grandmothers or in common cause around something that they care deeply about. I think that's the greatest piece of a suggestion that I would make from what I've learned from others.
That's interesting, because I was just at a conference this weekend and we were talking about limiting beliefs. And one of the things that I brought up was ageism. Mm-hmm. And I said, I don't believe in it and I don't think it's true, but enough people have said it to me that I need to acknowledge it. And so, but everybody at the conference just poo-pooed the whole thing and thought, no, that's not true. That's not true at all. However, one woman came up to me and said, I want to thank you so much for bringing this up, because nobody talks about it. Nobody wants to admit it. But she said, I can tell you it is definitely out there. So what advice would you give to women over 50 who are still working?
Well, I feel like I'm not the best placed person to be doling out advice. I'm just over 50 myself and still working. But I think what I would say, because I meet with a lot of women of my age and older, that work is often all-consuming, and if you have a family as well, work and family can take up so much of your life. But I think I'd say to women who are working, because there are so many, Gail, who come into my office, as I was saying, who say, I've made my way in the world, I'm doing okay, I'd like to give back, but I absolutely don't know how. What can I do? And I'm feeling slightly unfulfilled. And I think that's what I'll speak to, because I think that's quite a difficult thing. It's all very well to say you can give back, you can get involved, we can all make a difference, as I do like to say, but it's hard to find the time. In real life, it is very hard to carve out more hours. And so I think that there are so many ways open to us now to become involved in things that we care about. I mean, sometimes it's signing petitions, sometimes it's being on conference calls, lending some of your expertise through a particular group that shares expertise. Sometimes it is just writing a check. Sometimes it's putting time aside to take a trip to learn something about a situation that you care about so that you can be an ambassador when you come back. I say to a lot of women, particularly in the private sector, I say to them, one of the things that is actually quite valuable is if you are able to amplify the voices of other women in particular who are not being heard, other people don't know what's going on. Very few of us know, for instance, that in the Ebola crisis, which I don't like to bring up again, it's nice that chapter is closed where everybody was very frightened by it. It was women in Liberia who were the first responders to Ebola, and they were there on the ground in their communities working, and they were really the reason that it was overcome. Not because UNICEF and Doctors Without Borders and the others weren't helpful. They were, of course. But women were the first responders, and they were doing everything that they could in their power to contain the Ebola virus. But we never heard that story. So sometimes, if you're in the private sector, or even in outside, if you're in a position where you can share information with people and tell the stories that are not being told, it's extraordinarily powerful. So it's not always, I don't think it's the easiest thing. I think it's very easy to say, get involved, do your thing, you can find a way. I actually think it's quite hard when you're a working woman in your 50s and 60s. And so I think it does take just a moment to sit down and think about, what are you already doing? What do you already have access to? What is it that you can contribute that is meaningful, that later on when you have more time you can develop more deeply? But right now, don't let it stop you from starting the process of having that richness in your life.
Well, I think women are so much more emotionally tied to the community than men are. I mean, men do a lot of good work, and men belong to organizations and volunteer their time and so forth, but women really get involved. I mean, if they are interested in something, they really get involved. So what do you define success as for women who are over 50?
Well, I've thought about this a lot because I think that success is a real driver, and it's such a loaded word, isn't it? It's just such a powerful word in our lives,
And
success.
everybody thinks success is something different.
That's right. And I think, if you have three people in the room, you'll have six definitions of success. But I think I feel strongly about just one element of the definition of success. I think that in in our culture in North America, we, generally speaking, success is very much determined by our stature, our our titles, the amount of money that we make, the kind of security that we've developed for our families. There's another dimension of it now, I think, that's very intense for young people around being known, being recognized. I'm not going to say that that's all nonsense. It's not for me to say. There are different reasons why people are driven in different ways. I think, though, that the real metrics of success for me, and I would encourage people to think about it, is what do we mean by a life well lived? And when it's just about acquisition and recognition, then I think that leaves us somewhat bankrupt in terms of the fullness of life and what it means to be connected to others and what it means to leave a legacy. I often hear about legacies and people are talking about their wills and their gifts, but I think that legacy has a much deeper meaning around the kind of contribution that we can make to the betterment of the human condition. And I think that is something I think that all people feel at some point in life. Is this all there is? I've done it, I achieved it. Why don't I feel as good as I thought I would? And I do think, and I hope actually for all human beings that we do come to that moment, because I think that real success in life, I think, is finding a way to become bigger than yourself and to look outward. And there are many, many years in our lives where we do have to, out of necessity, be looking at our own lives and building them. But I think there is a moment that's extraordinarily important for all of us. And I live my life thinking about this. How do I look outward? And how do I make my own impact, not for the sake of being recognized, but for the knowledge that I've done everything that's in my power to do to make the world a more bearable, more humane, more livable, and ultimately more appealing and fair and equal place to live.
Well, it's funny. I've always kind of prided myself that I was always contributing with whatever business I had. And I used to have a chain of career schools, and one of them was a charm and a modeling school. And
Yeah.
believe it or not, I got a request on LinkedIn, and it said, I was a graduate of your charm school in 1975, and I would like to connect with you on LinkedIn. And I just got such a hoot out of that because, it's a long time ago and people who know me now don't have a clue that I ever was in that kind of business. And it was so interesting to see, A, what she's doing now, that B, she remembered me because, still, 1975 was a long time ago, and that she wanted to hook up on LinkedIn. So the thing is that I think if you ask yourself, am I doing something every day that adds to somebody else's life? It makes a big difference.
Yes.
So, what's the biggest aha that you have gotten from interviewing all these grandmothers that you think would be useful for our listeners over 50, who some of whom are grandmothers? What would you think would be helpful for them to hear?
There are two. One is just a personal reflection and a personal aha, which is the first interview I ever did was with my own mother, because she is, as I said, the most powerful grandmother in my life. And she said something to me that just blew me away. I never thought of it. She said, when your children are so busy with their new babies and their toddlers, there needs to be this steady hum of support in the background when you're a new mother and you have a new family. And grandmothers are often that steady hum of support. And she said, I don't even think that our adult children are entirely aware of how much support they're getting from us. You might be grateful for the babysitting or the night out with your spouse, or the fact that, the grandma can teach you, or your mother can teach you how to quiet a colicky baby. But there's this knowledge that there's a safety net for, not for every family, sadly, but for so many families, where there's this steady hum of support. And I thought, isn't she right? So in the familial context, that was a big aha. And a lot of the grandmothers I've been speaking to, whether they're women's rights activists or whether they're running businesses or whatever they're doing in life, a lot of them have talked about that is a role that they play with great pleasure in the lives of their adult children and their grandchildren. I think the other thing that's been an aha for me is that I don't think I realized the extent to which women, I grew up in a feminist household, Gail. Like, I grew up with all sorts of woman power stuff around me. So I always thought girls could do anything, women could do anything. I went out into the world with a lot of support and energy and enthusiasm. But even now, I don't think we realize the extent to which we're carrying around an enormous number of burdens, worrying about reputation and getting ahead at work and dealing with the world at large in our working lives and our family lives and work-life balance. I think that women, particularly over 50, I think we're dealing with an enormous amount. Life just feels like a constant juggling, balancing act, and everything's important. How do you let go of one thing for another, including taking care of yourself and your health? And so one of the aha things for me listening to grandmothers is how they had dealt with that and how relieved they were and liberated they were to move on from it. And then there's almost like another rush of energy that comes a little bit later when you realize that that's not your concern anymore. How you look, how you sound, whether you're making it in the professional life, whether your kids are okay, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that there is this moment. And with that moment can come, if you pounce on it and if you employ it in the benefit of whatever you want to do, a lot of relief and energy. I'm amazed to hear that in so many of the grandmothers' voices that I speak to. How
That
much.
really is interesting,
Yes.
because of course, I really think younger women have those same issues. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I talk to them and when they talk about balancing and they've got, kids and the soccer games and the ballet lessons and the you know, there's just so many
Exactly.
things going on today, and I have to admit I'm not I'm a great grandmother for advice. I'm not a great grandmother for taking care of your kids. I have never been a great taking care of kids person.
Right.
And so even when my first job when I was 13, I had broken 22 pair of glasses, and my father told me if I broke another pair, I was paying for them. And I broke my 23rd pair just the day I got them. I put them on the seat of the car and sat on them. And of course, I was 13, and the only thing available was babysitting, which I refused to do because I thought, well, I'll just not, I'll kill any kid I'm babysitting for. So I became an Avon lady, but it was interesting because, and even with my own kids, my husband really did the fair share of everything. I mean, he loves kids. He loved, he would have had a dozen because he just loved them. But, and that was great for me because, that was not something I enjoyed doing. And yet today, I'm very close with my kids and, I don't have any issues with them at all. But you're over 50, just like
Hmm.
you said, but you're over there. So what's been your greatest challenge?
Well, my greatest, my greatest challenge is that too. My greatest challenge in my early 50s is is finding that balance, and everybody talks about it, so it's not revelatory. But I think that it's for me, it's not the balance of work and life. My work is my passion, and my energy around the work and my belief in the work is uh, is what I'm about. And so work isn't something outside of my life. It is very much what my life is about. And then I have these two teenage sons, so that's a whole other part of life that takes up a lot of time and a lot of energy and emotional engagement. And I think that part of what I struggle with the most is how not so much how to balance all of it, but how to decide what the priorities are. Some of them are obvious, right? Some of them are just easy. They have to be priorities. You have to take care of the kids. You have to do your job, etc. But it's more about how do I prioritize some things which, in this moment in life, in my early 50s, are so easily going to just drop right off the radar. They're not, if I want to go to some kind of class, or if I want to read a book, or if I want to learn something new, even a new skill that will help me in my work or in my life, in my family. Those are things that it's easy to put them off. And so my greatest challenge is how not so much the balance, because I don't really believe you can find one. I just think it's full steam ahead and you just keep going. But I think it is about figuring out what are those priorities and not letting the things that are not urgent and right in front of you, making sure that they are still something that you get to at this stage in life.
Well, I always say that balance is always changing
Right.
because what you had growing up is one kind of balance. Going to college or whatever your education is another balance. Getting your first job and working is another balance. Getting
Hmm.
married and raising a family is another balance, and so on and so on and so forth. And I'm going to be moving towards the middle of next year, and that'll be a whole new balance for me because it'll be a new community. It'll be new
Hmm.
people. So that's always changing. But and one balance for a person is not the balance for another person.
Right.
So you were, a lawyer, a human rights lawyer. You worked at the United Nations as a human rights advisor. So what made you get into philanthropy?
You know, I did have work as a human rights and labor lawyer and at the UN that I really loved, and I felt extraordinarily fortunate to do what I was doing, and I was able to work in many different countries with women's rights groups all around the world, and it was a really glorious time and an extraordinary time of learning. But I did realize, Gail, at a certain point that these women who were doing everything that they could, and there's all sorts of extraordinary work going on around the world, that I was learning more from them than they were from me. I was a younger woman and I was very happy to be helpful in any way I could and to bring all of the forced to bear that I could from the position that I had at the United Nations. But at a certain point, I realized that I had the ability to talk to people and to raise awareness about quite extraordinary things that women were doing the world over for which they didn't have enough support, and that people didn't know enough about what was going on, didn't see it, and that there was a lot of cynicism around impact and how do you know the money's really going where it's going. And very, very often, and at the UN you see this a lot, the money will go to governments and be working at the governmental level, and maybe it'll go to hospitals and clinics or the mid-level. But very rarely do you see the money trickling down and getting into the hands of grassroots communities and community-based organizations where they are really dealing with the crisis front on, right head on. And they're the ones who are trying to die with dignity or struggle for survival or change the system, whatever it is that they're doing. And I thought, they don't need me. They really are the experts on what it's going to take to turn the situation around, no matter what it is, from sexual violence to HIV and AIDS. But they just don't have, I always say they know what to do and they know how to do it. They just don't have the funds to make it real. And so I decided to dedicate the next chapter of my life, which I've done for the last 15 years, to raising those funds. And that doesn't feel, in the beginning, as I said, I was a little shy about fundraising, but very quickly, you realize that that is the contribution that I really can make and should make, and it's what I can do. So I feel very, very privileged and extremely lucky to be in a position where I can talk to people about something that really matters and help them step into that opportunity to have a concrete, tangible, meaningful impact in people's lives.
Well, it's certainly admirable, and it's certainly, I think, an inspiration to women out there who say, they do have a particular thing or cause or charity or something that they feel so, so deeply about, and they don't know how to get started. So how can people find you, Ilana? What is the best way to know about your work and get in touch with you if they're interested and so forth?
Absolutely. Thanks for asking, Gail. People can get in touch with me. I have a website for the podcast, so it's grandmothersonthemove.com. My name, Ilana Landsberg Lewis, is a little longer, but you can find me on ilanalandsberglewis.com. That'll take you to the podcast page where it will tell you about the work of the Stephen Lewis Foundation, working on AIDS in Africa, the Grandmothers to Grandmothers campaign. If you want to join a group or start a group, which would be a tremendous thing to do in the United States, then you can find out how to get in touch with us that way. And just about anything and everything. And all of the episodes of the podcast are there too.
And in case you're wondering how she spells her name, Ilana is Ilana, and Landsberg is Landsberg-Lewis, Lewis. But if you remember grandmothersonthemove.com, that'll get you to Ilana, and that will be very, very helpful, I know, for everybody. So, we have just a couple minutes left. What have we not covered that you think is important for our audience to hear?
Well, one of the things that I do now that I have the podcast, Gail, is I read a lot and I follow all sorts of things. I surf the web and on Facebook, looking for extraordinary grandmothers. But when I say extraordinary, I mean ordinary grandmothers who are extraordinary humans. And I'm always looking out for really interesting women around the world who are there to inspire and to influence and to make us think. And so I think that there's an awareness that is lacking of how much women over 50, but particularly I would say women over 60, how much of a vital contribution they're making. Even if you look at the Supreme Court in your country, you have an extraordinary grandmother, older woman on the Supreme Court of the United States. There are older women all over who are just changing the world as we know it. But I think that that's not part of this is about, and this is the part I would say we haven't talked about, is that part of this is that it's not just about generational interest. we know that you have to look at the person's whole life. We all live whole lives, not just in the sphere of older women or being a grandmother or, being a family person. And so it really is about building community and building awareness and of each other. And and I don't mean that in what some people think is sort of a lefty liberal way. I mean in real life. Our lives and our relationships and our quality of life depend on those relationships and that connectivity. And to just think of, oh, grandmothers are great, grandmothers are doing great things. No, the human family requires all of us to be actively engaged and active participants, not just for survival, but for a decent and rich quality of life. And I think that's the piece for me where when I see the grandmothers talking about AIDS in Africa or about the strength and resilience of African grandmothers, and I see when I'm at meetings and when I'm listening to them speak, I see the extraordinary pride that their grandchildren have. I see their grandchildren seeing their grandmothers and grandothers as global citizens. And I see their own adult children looking at the grandmothers, grandothers, great grandmothers as having a whole dimension to life that they, as their adult children, did not see before. And I think that that's extraordinarily important. Our human family needs more resilience, some resuscitation, and deeper richness and connectivity to the world around us. And I think
I
that,
totally agree.
yeah.
Well, I'll tell you, you've been listening to Ilana Landsberg Lewis. You can reach her at grandmothersonthemove.com. Thank you so much for being with us, Ilana. We really have learned a lot today, and congratulations and continued good work ahead.
Well, thank you, Gayle. You're an inspiration.